really vulgar, it's obscene, because there are these border guards who are actually egging on the crowds to shout slogans which are anti-Pakistani slogans. It's a kind of hyper nationalism which is being whipped up throughout the ceremony. There are young people who are brought out into the arena to dance and to sing, and pretty much the same thing is happening on the other side of the border. And the worst side, if you can call it a bad side, is the side of these, people are walking across the border, in the sense that there are ordinary citizens who are walking across. So there are Pakistani citizens who are coming onto the Indian side, and they are walking into this arena where this hyper nationalistic Indian slogans are being raised, and I wondered what they would be feeling, at such a time. So that was one memory, which I thought I'd share with you. There's also another, there's something called Aman Ki Asha, which is the peace initiative by civil society activists started a few years ago, and they decided to set up a simple memorial to partition. It's in the form of an obelisk, which is at the border, and there's a simple inscription which says, in the memory of the thousands of Punjabis who died in 1947-48. Okay? It does not name any victims, any specific victim. It simply says thousands of Punjabis, which is basically the community, the Punjabi-speaking community, which suffered on both sides of the border. But this memorial is unnoticed by everybody. There are these thousands of people who are milling around to go to that ceremony, and they walk past, and nobody sees it. My students didn't see it. And when we were discussing this, I said, "Did you see this? Did you see this?" And they said, "No, where was it? We never saw it. It was right there." And I had to then take them back and show them that this is another memorial. Take a look at this. All right. So what has happened in the last few months? Well, much has happened in India in the last few months. Article 370, which is a very important part. I'm sorry, I probably need to take 1 minute of your time to just tell you what I'm talking about. The state of Jammu and Kashmir, which has been very much in the news recently, this was a princely state at the time of Indian independence. It was not a part of British India, and there were several princely states who had to take a decision about whether to become a part of the Indian Union or Pakistan. While most of these princely states were scattered all across colonial British India, Kashmir was a state which would have gone to either India or Pakistan because it shared contiguous borders with both the new states. The principle of religious communities, that is, if you were a majority Muslim state, then you would naturally become a part of Pakistan, and if you were a Hindu state, you would become a part of India. This was a little problematic in the case of Kashmir because there were three distinct regions. One was Buddhist, one was Hindu, and the other was Muslim. However, the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir did accede to the Indian Union on the basis of certain guarantees that the Indian Union had agreed. And one of these guarantees was that Kashmir would be given, its state would be allowed to have its own flag, its own constitution, and its own assembly, except it would go along with the Indian Union only in, I think, 2 or 3 different aspects. One had to do with foreign policy, security, or something of that sort. The broader agreements. But internally, it had full autonomy. What the right-wing government has done is unilaterally dissolved that contract. They have split up the state into 3 parts, 2 union territories of the state. They have stripped the state unilaterally without reference to any legislative or legal process, and so that has happened. It's history now. The Parliament has already approved it. The right-wing party has a brute majority in Parliament, and they can pass anything that they want. It goes against constitutional values. It goes against all kinds of legal propriety. It goes against any international law. But they've just gone ahead and done it in the most shameless manner possible. So just to return to the phrase which we've been talking about this now. The second thing that has happened is that the right-wing government decided on something called the National Register of Citizens. In India, as you know, who is a citizen? How do you decide who a citizen is pretty much governed by people who live within the space that is within the territorial space that is called India. And we had something called the Citizenship Act of 1955, which basically acknowledged that anybody who was living in India, not born in India, but living in India at that point was a citizen of India. And all citizens of India were given equal status before the law. So it was, the formal definition of the citizen of India was equality of all irrespective of caste, class, gender and race, and these are all constitutional, there in the Constitution. Equality of opportunity before law, and also something very interesting, the right to freely practice and profess and propagate your religious faith. In a multi-religious country like India, the idea of the secular is somewhat different from the way it is defined in the Western world. In fact, the term that we use for secular in India it's a Hindi word called dharm nirpeksh, which means neutrality towards all religions. That is, the state is neutral towards all religions, even as it accepts all religions as equally valid, right? So it does not deny religion, it accepts all religious faiths as equal. This definition of citizenship has been questioned and in fact subverted by a new law that the state the cabinet has already approved it, it's going to come to parliament, and most of us believe that it will be approved through parliament. This new law is called a Citizenship Amendment Bill. It sounds, in its real terms, it's pretty innocuous. What it seeks to do is to actually deny refugee status to anybody who seeks asylum who is a Muslim. So the Indian state will accept the request for refugee status from Hindus, Christians, Parsis, Buddhists, and any other religious faith that you may belong to, but it will not accept a Muslim seeking refugee status in India. This is, of course, completely understandable from the present dispensation's point of view, because their fundamental agenda is to create a Hindu state, a Hindu Rashtra, a state and a nation which is going to be decided, which is going to be determined and identified on the basis of a single faith and a single culture which is associated with that particular religious persuasion. So for the first time in our history since 1947, we actually have a constitutional arrangement which is going to be subverted and which is going to allow the entry of a very unusual and very sort of unique notion or definition of what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be an Indian. But let me move away from the formal definitions of citizenship and talk a little bit about the informal notions of collectivities that have brought us to these formal definitions in 1947. And these informal collectivities have to do, we need to understand this because when we talk about partition as a cultural trauma and what it is emerging from, we have to go back a few centuries to actually try and understand the emergence of or the entry of Islam in India. Now, Islam comes to India pretty early, around the 10th or the 11th century AD. And it comes with conquerors, settlers, with Sufi mystics. It comes with all kinds of people from West Asia. It's a faith which is accepted, people accept the new faith as one that is adding a new color, a new texture to the existing fabric of the religious rituals, practices, and beliefs that already exist. I mean, there are diverse faiths, there are diverse rituals and practices that exist before the coming of Islam, and Islam then is simply seen as yet another addition to that mosaic, right? So Islam has a pretty long history in India. It finds converts. Lots of people do convert to the new religion. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily because they are fascinated by the new faith. It could have something to do also with the fact that we had Muslim rulers. We had the Mughal dynasty which ruled large parts of the Indian subcontinent for close to 350 years or so. Nevertheless, Islam does find a place within the Indian subcontinent. Now, if colonialism was one of the first original traumas that was experienced by people in this region, we had the partition in 1947. And I don't want to go into the historical reasons for why it happened and how it happened, because that's really for the social scientists and historians to discuss. But partition basically happened on the basis of the idea that two religious communities constitute two distinct nations. The Hindus are a majority, and minority rights within a majoritarian Hindu country could not. This is how the argument went. They could not be protected within a Hindu majoritarian society, and hence the need to create an exclusive Islamic nation, which was created for Indian Muslims, in Pakistan. Therefore, as the Mughal Empire departed, we had the emergence of the birth of these two nations, which sometimes people refer to as twins separated at birth. And twins because they are so identical. They are so similar to each other that it is absolutely amazing how we could have possibly separated from each other. Nevertheless, it did happen, and it is this trauma that has cast its long shadow and come back to haunt us in the current day. So in other words, what I'm trying to trace is a continuity from 1947 onwards to current times, to contemporary times. I think Mary was talking about how certain kinds of ideas associated with the right will never really go away. I mean, they come back to haunt us. When they find the space, they grow. And this is exactly what has been happening in India in the last 10 years, 15 years. The last few decades certainly has been the growth of these right-wing fundamentalist forces. And they are now on the rampage, right? So from a situation where they occupied, they were hidden, they were there, but they were not quite sort of confident enough or shameless enough to come out. We have now reached a situation where these kinds of ideas and these kinds of positions are being taken by people without any shame. And it is therefore understandable that we have once again gone back to this idea of the Hindu Rashtra, or the Hindu nation, an idea which had gained currency in 1947 also when partition happened. Remember that Pakistan had been created on the basis of Islam, and there were many in India who also thought that India should now become a Hindu Rashtra. Now that the Muslims have had their share, they had that common flesh, we should now declare ourselves to be a Hindu Rashtra. Fortunately, our founding fathers did not agree with this position, not just our founding fathers, but I think a majority of people who stayed back. In fact, it was not just, even Muslims stayed back in India. In fact, the irony of the situation was that India still had then and still has the largest number of Muslims within the Asian subcontinent. So that itself was a subversion of this idea that India could possibly become a Hindu Rashtra. Certainly the founding fathers did not agree with this, and we declare ourselves to be a secular republic. Nevertheless, the people who had argued for a Hindu Rashtra, their ideas, they remained there. They continued to survive over the years, and now that they have found this space, this newfound space in this new dispensation, this new global order, they are coming back and they are declaring and demanding pretty much what was demanded in 1947. But I want to actually take you back to the moment of partition itself and the cultural resistance to that partition. Not just the political and ideological one, but of course cultural does also relatively include the cultural, the political and the ideological. And this is the resistance by writer activists that I talked about in Croatia also. Writer activists who were associated with a group which was called the Indian Progressive Writers Association, a group of cultural activists, intellectuals, all kinds of people, theater activists, theater people, filmmakers, and so on and so forth, who had, the group was formed in 1936, and its purpose really was to sort of oppose colonial rule and imperialism in India. But after 1947, around the time of the partition, around the time of independence, they also engaged very deeply with this issue of partition and communalism and the shape the new nation was to take. And one of the things that they engaged with was really how to represent the violence of partition. This is one of the issues which was taken up in the morning session also. How do you represent something which is as traumatic as partition, as traumatic as the violence that accompanied partition? What are the various forms that this representation will take? Who will you represent and how? Can that violence really be represented at all, or is it fundamentally unrepresentable? This was a question which concerned many cultural activists, writers, as I said, particularly those we might talk about. And initially, you had this kind of very naturalistic kind of documentation of violence. It was almost as if the writer was standing outside and just being a witness to the terrible acts that were happening all around. However, it tended to become like just an overwhelming documentation of one violent act after the other. And perhaps what they were trying to do was simply shock readers, make them aware of the terrible atrocities that were being committed in the name of religion. But very soon, writers did realize that it was not something that was really capturing the reality, if one may call it, of partition violence. And therefore, they searched for alternative kinds of forms, particularly in literary representations. And one of the writers who was extremely important in this regard was a writer called Saadat Hasan Manto. He wrote in Urdu, and I will just sort of again briefly tell you a little bit about this because the issue of language and culture is so integrally related to the idea of partition itself. After Pakistan was born, it declared Urdu to be its national language. Urdu was a language which was spoken and understood by a majority of people all over northern India. It is written in the Perso-Arabic script, but that is the script which everybody knew, both Hindus and Muslims. But after partition, because the script is the Perso-Arabic script, even earlier than that, this had already happened. The association or the connection which was established between the script, the religion, and therefore the religious community had already happened from the late 19th century onwards. This then became the rationale for declaring Pakistan to be the national language of Pakistan. So Angie is telling me I need to hurry up, but so let me just sort of quickly get on to this writer Saadat Hasan Manto. In Dubrovnik, I had referred to some 8 or 9 letters that he wrote. Manto was a very unique kind of writer in the sense that he was a complete non-conformist. He never got along with anybody of the literary establishment. He was constantly being seen as the outlier. People could not tolerate, could not accept what he was writing. They very often objected to it on grounds of calling it obscene, calling it too crude, and so on and so forth. But he didn't care very much about them, and he produced a large body of literature in a very short period of time between 1948 and 1965. He died very young at the age of 42 because of cirrhosis of the liver. He spent most of his life in India, but the last few years were spent in Pakistan. He decided to migrate because he felt he was being discriminated against. When he goes to Pakistan, he is charged with obscenity, and he writes these letters to Uncle Sam. These are commissioned letters by the USIS. The USIS, which is trying to spread its influence in Pakistan, I mean not the US, the Americans want to sort of culturally establish themselves within Pakistan, so they set up USIS. USIS then sends a gentleman called Mr. Smith to meet Manto, who is the great short story writer in Urdu, and says, well, why don't you contribute something to our journal? He says, I write in Urdu. He says, that's okay, we'll publish in Urdu. So he says, but will I be allowed to write what I want to write? He says, yeah, sure. We are Americans. We'll let you write what you write. And so the story goes that the next day, Manto turned up with the first letter to Uncle Sam, and the staff doesn't know what to do with it, because that letter it's basically sort of it's a tongue-in-cheek letter. It's a very critical letter. It's a letter which exposes American imperialism and its role in world politics. It sort of talks about the nexus between Uncle Sam and John Bull, and he says, don't let me talk about this, it won't be music to your ears, and so on and so forth. It goes on in this kind of manner. So the letters are something that we might talk about, but I just want to quote from two of his, he wrote these, he experimented with all kinds of forms. And one of the forms he experimented was something that we don't have a name for. It's a collection of short pieces. Some of these are as short as 2 sentences. Some of them are about 5 sentences, a paragraph long. And he called it Siyah Hashiye, which means black margins. Right? That's the title of the entire work. And I'll just read out. I'll end with that because I know I'm short of time. I'll just read out English translations of a couple of these. The two friends finally picked out a girl from the dozen or so they had been shown. She cost 2 rupees, and they brought her to their place. One of them spent the night with her. What is your name? He asked. When she told him, he was taken aback. But we were told you are from the other religion. They lied, she replied. The bastards cheated us, he screamed. Selling us a girl who is one of us? I want my money back. That's one. The next one is called The Fool. Commenting on his suicide, a friend of his said, "What a fool. I kept arguing with him that if his beard had been forcibly shaven off and his long hair had been scissored, it did not mean that he was no longer a Sikh." Sikhs being a particular kind of religious community which religion sort of enjoins them to grow their hair and their beard. So he says, what a fool. I mean, I told him that, so what if your beard had been shaven, your hair had been cut? Massage your face and head with yogurt every day, I advised him. And by the benediction of the Guru, your hair will grow back in 1 year and nobody will ever tell the difference. That's stupid. I'll end with that. Thank you.